Well, I've also spent a lot of time there. I spent enough time to fly, over 100,000 miles on Aeroflot. Um, that's like being sentenced. You never know when you got on if you were going to get off.
I know, I flew it.
Um, but have really close friends. Was involved in the early days of the political revolution in Russia in the early 90s. Did a lot of consulting work for candidates over there. And I came away once it became clear that Putin not only was going to come to power, but would really consolidate his power. There are three things that I've seen in Russia that I don't know that the Russians can overcome because it has become so entrenched in them. First is the women really run the country and never have any authority to run the country. But if you wanted to find out what was going on in any department, you go down about three levels, and there was a woman there who didn't have a title, but she had a really nice office, and everybody took care of her. And that's where you found out what was going on. And the companies, their corporations, were the exact same way. So many of the men, they spent their entire time chasing skirts and drinking. But the women run the country, but they've never been put in a position of authority to actually do that. So they're constantly trying to manage from below. The second thing I noticed is, especially right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the men spent all their time walking around looking at their shoes. I could walk down the street in Moscow or St. Pete or Khabarovsk or even the small towns, and the guys who walk by never even noticed that I'd be wearing a American CIA sweatshirt.
Yeah.
And it was kind of an experiment to see, because they were always looking at their feet. They were just so distraught with what
Yeah.
was going on.
Yeah.
Um, but when I say that they were looking at their feet, the one thing that jerked them out of that was a really strong leader came along and gave them purpose again. So if you go back to the time of the czars, they've always been led. And so they aren't looking for representation, they're looking for leadership, and they
Yeah.
have that now.
Yeah.
The last thing is that from a political science standpoint, I've got another really good friend who's a writer, Andre Frieden, who went to law school in Moscow. And the way the Russians look at law is completely different than we do. Law is a blind set of rules, and those rules apply to everybody unless you're a person of authority, and then they don't apply to you at all. And that has been so accepted in that country for so long. That is the single biggest crisis. So you add up, the people that run the country don't have any real power. The men have been drug into this, led into this, okay, and they're just so happy to have a leader again that allows them to look up and smile. And the fact that the rules don't apply to everybody. Anybody who has ever spent any time in that environment and it comes back to the United States, the first thing you want to do is get a milkshake and a hamburger. The second thing you want to do is start thinking about, oh my God, how lucky I am to have gotten off the plane back in this country.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I thought the people, they kept their heads down because if you raised your head, it was possible somebody was going to snatch you. It was a sad situation. Um, Not to diverge too much, but I was up in Tofino, Canada, fishing, and we went into a restaurant, and the waitress was Russian. And I said something to her about Canada or whatever, and she said, "Oh, I'm leaving this place." And I said, "Well, why? Where are you going?" She goes, "I'm going back to Stalingrad." And I said, "Are you?" Not St. Petersburg, Stalin.
Yeah.
I said, "Are you?" She says, "Yes, I'm going back there. Things make sense there. Men make sense there." And I just kept my mouth shut and nodded my head. So,
See,
you know,
I put, I guarantee you that woman appears in at least two of my books. At least two of my books. And I've never met her, but
yeah,
it is so true. But the other thing, she's going back where she will be the dominant player in the household, period.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I have great empathy for the Russian people. I just don't know how they get out of this mess. I feel very much the same. My family, I spent years as a kid with my family living in Iran prior to the fall of the Shah. Unlike a lot of people, I am enthusiastically behind this war against Iran because we've been at war with them for 47 years.
Sure.
And I I dug around the other day and I couldn't find it. Finally found it last night. I dug out an old book that I'd read about Neville Chamberlain and Hitler in the lead up to World War II, and how appeasement absolutely guaranteed that war was going to happen.
Absolutely.
And I've been watching that from a person with insider knowledge and friends, a lot of friends who are deeply hurt in the Iranian Revolution. A number of them had made family members killed. My dad was really close friends with the family. One family had three brothers that ran the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force in Iran. And all three of them during the revolution refused to fight their own people and allowed the revolution to occur. And 3 weeks later, were stood up against the wall and shot.
Yeah.
And they weren't shot because they were leaders of the military. They were shot because they were Shia, but they were also Baha'i, and that made them unclean.
Yeah.
So I would like to see this war prosecuted at the end. I don't know that the American public is going to allow that to happen. If that doesn't happen, we're going to have to go do it again.
Yeah, I think you talk about appeasement, and what happened in the last, I think, 12 years in particular was this idea of appeasement. And it's really dangerous, especially for the state of Israel. And again, I'm not a political person, but I think to allow them to get nuclear weapons, that's you're just begging that they will launch. I think it's scary enough that the guy in North Korea has nuclear weapons, but to have a religious ideology that stands behind hatred of people because they're Jewish, hatred of people because they exist, hatred because they're in a place where they don't think they belong. Boy, it's a very scary proposition. I've been very blessed. I'm younger than you are, and I've been very blessed that I was too young really for the Vietnam War. I was 15 years removed from World War II. My life has been one without a lot of conflict, and I thought that we were going to see a change for real in Russia, and we're not. So it's a whole new world out there, as you know. And I don't know where this is all going to end up, but it's going to be scary.
For somebody who likes to write international thrillers, it's a fascinating world.
Yeah,
it is. And, I had a book come out not quite 2 years ago, specifically about how the Iranian regime comes to an end. Yeah. I didn't hit it right on the money, but pretty damn close. How this is happening. But the gist of it was somebody else stirred up a war between Iran and the United States because they knew that all by themselves they couldn't deal with the problem. And I think a combination of Iranian dissidents and the Jewish state, Israel, have managed to do that. But it was coming anyway. Eventually was going to come. And you are absolutely right, Bob, that the mullahs in Iran do not feel that they lead a country. They are the last survivors of a religion that desperately needs to be saved. And unlike most wars, they have everything to lose. And there is nothing to be gained unless they win, period. Yeah. There's no going back. It's terrifying. Right. Yeah, and if they had them, they would use nuclear weapons. They would have already used them.
Yeah, that's always the scariest foe, is the one that has nothing to lose.
Yeah.
I said to somebody the other day, writing international thrillers, I'm sure it's interesting, but this idea of we're going to build up the biggest navy and the most warships and the most guns and the most bullets. The Vietnam War changed the way that wars were fought. They were no longer fought, side facing side, casting bombs. They were fought guerrilla warfare
Right.
and just wear the other side out, wear the other side out. And then what's happened in Ukraine, again, it changed, I think, the face of warfare, which is it's guerrilla warfare, but it's done with drones and other things other than human soldiers, the loss of human life.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, I can tell that this will be a fascinating time for international thriller writers, to deal with all this stuff. It's crazy. It's a crazy time right now we live in.